This video is kindly sponsored by Conflict of Nations. Sign up using the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium. Conflict of Nations is a massive online strategy game available in your browser and smartphone. Train and upgrade your army using multiple tech trees and form the mightiest coalitions on the map. Wage massive wars across continents and aim for world domination. Sign up and start playing Conflict of Nations today. Day 1 as Australia meant I had to start researching and building with the goal of fielding the best navy in the game. The arms industry was beefed up in order to yield more resources, and naval bases were upgraded in all of my coastal towns. I set out to conquer New Caledonia and the Solomon Islands. What I didn't know at the time was that attacking islands without a port requires marine infantry. My first naval unit, a corvette, was used in the bombing of the two islands. Any local resistance was shelled and eliminated in order to make the upcoming invasions smoother. Having realized I couldn't land my invasion force on either of the two smaller islands, I instead set my goal on Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Supported by a corvette, the landing was good to go. My first marine battalions were ready for action. They could strike the islands my regular infantry couldn't, and so the amphibious invasion could finally begin. This is an overview of my current area of operations. Marine battalions have occupied the Solomon Islands and New Caledonia with the support of Navy corvettes. My light infantry brigade successfully landed in Port Moresby and began their advance through the mountains and jungles of Papua New Guinea. My Marines had secretly landed in the remote jungles of Western New Guinea in preparation for the planned invasion of Indonesia. My first set of frigates had been produced, so my corvettes would now be used for recon and submarine detection in the more shallow waters. The joint attack on Indonesia by Australia, Thailand, and Vietnam was launched with great success. My units met light resistance in Western New Guinea, but made progress in capturing the regions. My frigates were sent out to hunt for any troop transports that could be sent down to reinforce the defenders, while my corvettes provided close gun support off the coast. And here's a quick look at the battle map. As my navy began to grow in both size and variation, my next goal was to expand east. New Zealand had shown little to no fighting spirit, and I realized I'd rather be the first line of defense against any threat from the east instead of him. Cruisers and destroyers were now part of my naval arsenal, and with that, the ability to launch devastating long-range cruise missiles. Cruise missiles were launched at sea and land targets, including urban areas containing means of military production. These were also likely the areas to be defended by the majority of the New Zealand army. This would also reduce the risk of me losing the war on land. The Southern Invasion Force, safely ashore. Enemy navy, devastated by cruise missiles. So what's next? Hawaii. I wasn't sure about this, as it would be an extremely difficult task invading the United States of America, including fighting his continental allies of Mexico and Brazil. But I saw no other suitable option. I'd either expand or be contained. Pearl Harbor 2.0. The Americans saw what was coming and began evacuating forces before the attack. My frigates began bombarding the island, and my larger warships launched several cruise missiles. Shock and awe was the game, and I was here to show force. America wasn't sitting quiet. He tried invading Perth in Western Australia and actually managed to occupy Derby. Despite the not-so-minor setback, I had just gained a new ally. South Korea had agreed to aid me in the war. He would send his carrier group and a marine division to Alaska in order to open up another front. This would reduce the risk of an American counterattack on Hawaii and my eastern coast. Time was at the essence, so I dispatched my task force east, towards the west coast of America. The northern group was positioned north of San Francisco, and my southern group just south of Los Angeles. It was time to launch yet another devastating cruise missile attack. 2 cruise missiles were launched at the city, targeting military installations, and my navy was sent in to engage the unknown naval contact just off the coast. A transport ship carrying support units was spotted, likely arriving at port after being evacuated from Hawaii. US naval bombers attacked my main fleet, and 2 supporting frigates were sent west to support the ships. Once the threats had been neutralized, the ground invasion could commence. Marines were the first to fight, followed up by motorized infantry. USA launched a counteroffensive, but were stopped by Australian cruise missiles. A few days later, South Korea's carrier strike group had arrived, together with marines and armor. My fleet was moving down the Mexican west coast on its way to the Panama Canal. Australian infantry divisions had begun occupying the west coast while my marine battalions moved further east. My fleet used the Panama Canal to gain access to the Caribbean and met little to no resistance. Securing Cuba and nearby islands had to be done before moving up along the US east coast. Back home, Finland had sent a destroyer to attack my cities, but it was sunk by a Tomahawk cruise missile. Days later, and the bombardment of Washington, D.C. had begun. Several missiles were also launched at New York. The Australian and South Korean invasion of North America had been a complete success. No naval units had been lost, and the casualties of ground personnel was very low. US and Mexican forces had surrendered after just days of fighting, as cruise missiles had turned their defenses, ground forces, and any means of military production to scraps. After stabilizing the situation in North America with the help of Korean, Thai, and Chinese forces, my fleet set course for the western coast of Morocco. Talks had commenced with Egypt, the powerhouse of Africa, and a plan to invade Europe was drafted. The coalition would attack in Africa, the Caucasus, and Middle East, while my fleet would launch an attack and invasion of the British Isles. My fleet was split into two different task forces. The northern force would assist the Marines in attacking Ireland and Scotland, while the southern group would aid the landing in Plymouth. Several Marine battalions were landed in Glasgow and on the shores west of Manchester. The invasion force met fierce resistance from British ground forces, but they were eventually defeated with the help of my navy and its wide arsenal of weaponry. My navy also battled German warships in the English Channel, but defeated them without losses. Egyptian and Chinese forces, assisted by a Vietnamese battle group, were getting ready for the upcoming invasion of Greece and Italy. France had landed troops in Izmir, but received devastating Egyptian railgun fire as a response. With London being nuked and most of UK secured, my fleet could take control of the English Channel. Austria had sent a swarm of missiles, but all of them were shot down before they could reach my fleet. Having occupied the United Kingdom and secured the English Channel, it was now time to send my fleet south to aid the Egyptians in taking North Africa. Syrian and Israeli forces were about to attack Austrian and Romanian forces in Bulgaria, and China had massed forces in Libya in preparation for the invasion of German Italy. Meanwhile, Vietnam attempted an amphibious invasion of Greece without any naval support. It was safe to assume that it was going to fail and end in a catastrophe for the Vietnamese forces. My fleet entered the Mediterranean Sea through the Strait of Gibraltar and sunk every enemy naval contact along the North African coast. Once the sea had been cleared of enemy warships, my navy positioned itself outside Rome and Naples, creating a safe zone from enemy airstrikes. China sent its invasion force to Rome, but the decision was later made to attack through Spain and not Italy, where we could use our advantage in numbers. A few days later, and my marines had landed on the coast of Normandy. The goal was to secure Paris and then move north into Flanders and later northern Germany, supported by Egyptian troops in southern France moving through northern Italy and Switzerland. British resistance remained firm in Ireland, but my navy kept them from crossing back and counterattacking. Troops were hastily being flown in from America and Canada to deal with the remaining British threat. Soon, Western Europe would be ours. Castle Germany was slowly being toppled. Israel and Syria attacked through the Balkans, while I landed my forces in Scandinavia. South Korea arrived to provide naval and air support, while the rest of the coalition battled German forces further south. Back in the Americas, my forces were getting organized with South Korean forces in preparation for the invasion of Argentina and Brazil. South America had to be conquered in order for us to win, and it was time to strike before the situation in Europe had settled. The invasion began with a horrendous missile barrage, followed by a swift invasion using marines and other land assets. The Navy would cruise the coast, supporting our units gaining ground ashore. South Korean air and armor made quick work out of the South American forces, and Australian Marines were sent south to invade and cut off supply and lines of communication. Back in Scandinavia, the Israelis had launched a surprise attack. I had to outmaneuver his division, rendering his territorial gains nothing but temporary ones, waiting for my navy and more armored divisions to arrive. While slowly working to diminish the enemy division, my units began striking Finnish towns in the hands of the Israelis. My navy was combating Israeli and Syrian forces in the Gulf of Aden. South Korea, Vietnam, and China had naturally been drawn into the conflict and was fighting Israeli and Syrian ground forces on a broad front in India and Russia. The Israeli division back in Scandinavia had lost many units, mostly armored, to my cruise missile strikes, and my infantry battalions on the ground could now stand a chance against fighting the remaining Israeli units. China had landed armored divisions in Sweden and sent them to set up a rear defense against any further attempts by Israel to counterattack. Meanwhile, my more mobile forces had gained lots of ground and were now fortifying themselves in St. Petersburg. I left one naval task force behind to patrol the Baltic Sea and support my infantry battalions against any enemy incursion. The Finnish front would remain quiet until the end of the game. The war would be determined in the east, and South Korea would play a major role. Egypt had refused to strike Israel and Syria due to old ties, despite being part of our coalition. South Korea landed its forces in the Arabian Peninsula, opening up another front. However, it did not last for long, as most units were withdrawn due to the inability to strike further west into the heartland of Syria and Israel. The forces were instead moved to the much larger Indian and Russian front, where Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, and Australian forces attacked at large. Enough territory was eventually gained, and our coalition earned its victory. This would not have been possible without South Korea's help. This victory was earned without the help of Egypt, who remained inactive for the majority of the war. Thank you guys for watching this video, and thank you to those of you who participated. Thank you to Conflict of Nations for making this a possibility. I hope we get the chance to do this again soon. I really do enjoy Conflict of Nations. Sorry for delaying this video so much. A lot of things have happened over the last couple of months. This game went on for over 90 days, which is absolutely massive. But once again, I really hope we get the opportunity to do something like this again, perhaps in a few days or weeks. I would really enjoy to play with my subscribers, and Conflict of Nations is perhaps one of the most fun, massive multiplayer experiences there are. It's a fantastic strategy game, and there's a lot of fun to be had with the diplomacy, technology, and all the warfare. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys soon again.